Hola, buenos días. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a todas.
Good morning, everyone. We will start shortly. In the meantime, we would like to ask you to follow the instructions that are on screen so that you can make sure that you are on the correct interpretation channel. We have simultaneous interpretation in English, Spanish, and French, and there will be participants that will speak in all three languages. If you'd like, you can do that now. You can choose your interpretation channel right now. Thank you.
Mais bienvenue à toutes et à tous.
Thank you and welcome. We'll start in 1 minute, and in the meantime, please follow the instructions that are written on the screen to make sure that you're in the right audio channel. We have interpretation today between French, English, and Spanish, and speakers will be talking in all three languages. So if you don't speak the three languages, please select your preferred interpretation channel.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to be starting in just 1 minute. In the meantime, we ask that you follow the instructions on the slide and make sure that you are in the correct interpretation channel. We have bidirectional interpretation in English, French, and Spanish today. We will also have speakers presenting in all three of those languages. So if you are not trilingual, please do make sure you're in the correct interpretation channel starting now. With that, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Shani Turk. I'm a senior Francophone technical writer at Pathfinder, and I am delighted to be here with all of you and alongside an outstanding set of speakers, the Power Shifting Subcommittee and ICFP organizers who are co-sponsoring this webinar. Really just want to appreciate everyone's commitment to raising awareness about this issue, especially at a time when we are all so deeply stretched. We're hoping that today's webinar gives participants a better understanding of how English language dominance is detrimental to us all in our field and offers practical approaches that we can all take to improve language inclusion. One of the ways we will be doing this is by modeling what a more inclusive, multilingual event can look like, including making sure we don't just have speakers presenting in English. To that end, I am going to switch over to French. Donc,
So on the slide, you can see the 6 best practices that we'll try to model today and that we encourage you to implement in your own events and conferences. We've already talked about 1 and 2, the presence of our interpreters, me, Awen, and Carlos, and the fact that we start off the event with instructions in all 3 languages on how to access interpretation. Then we encourage you to have slides that are bilingual or trilingual, or you can share separate slides in the chat. You can see me model also the norm number 4, and number 5 is the fact that we should encourage everyone to share questions in the chat, and my colleague will translate these questions. So I thank Marcia for that. She'll translate these questions in the chat. And number 6, we encourage you to speak slowly and clearly with pauses between speakers to make sure that our interpreters can do their work. We'll also share the slides after the webinar, and we encourage you to use them in your own events and webinars. Another point on logistics, before really kicking off this webinar, in about 1 hour, we'll break out in small sessions in breakout rooms, divided by language. So to make sure that we send you in the correct room, please rename your name and add the first 2 letters of your preferred language at the beginning of your name. So if you prefer to be in the French breakout room, we ask you to add FR before your Zoom name. For English, that would be EN, and for Spanish, ES. So you can see that, and you can see that on my own name on Zoom. If you have any issue doing this, we'll have more time later to help you. A few objectives for this meeting today. I had already mentioned a few of them, but so what we want you to take away from this meeting is to better understand how English hegemony impacts our field, and we want you to have in-depth knowledge about how to and practical approaches to fight against the English hegemony, and we want you to feel comfortable with how to implement these approaches. So regarding our agenda today, we'll have Francophone and Spanish-speaking experts on sexual and reproductive health. We also have a presentation of practical approaches. We'll have time for questions and responses. And then we'll transition to breakout rooms by language to work on practical tools to facilitate linguistic inclusion in your work. We'll work on a checklist for events planning in those breakout rooms. I would like to allow Goodness and Kelly to give a few words. Goodness is the co-president, the co-chair of the Power Shifting Subcommittee at ICFP, and Kelly is the chair of the International Steering Committee at ICFP. Goodness, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. And this is one very key way that we are working the talk when it comes to power shifting and power sharing, how that language key role when we talk about being heard, who is able to listen in, who is able to cause a good step in the right direction, where everyone can begin to integrate language inclusivity in your approach to programming, in your approach to the convening you are holding, the communities you are engaging, and how that you are listening in and seeking consciously a way that everyone is communicating. Communication cannot be one way. And we believe that as we build into ICFP 2025, the many communities involved in ICFP as a platform, this would continue to foster this very important approach. We hope that you learn a lot from the conversation that happens, and this kicks off more discussions. One webinar may not be able to answer all the questions, but take a step in the right direction. Thank you so much and have fun.
Thanks so much, Goodness. Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Power Shifting Subcommittee for ICFP for hosting this really important webinar. Goodness, Anne, Amanda, Yidnik, Nihal, Stephanie, Angela, so many of the co-chairs of this team have really led the charge on ensuring that the community continues to keep a very keen eye on equity and shifting power in so many different aspects of our work, both inside of our organizations and in our work with partners, young people across the field of reproductive health, and those we serve in the communities that we're in around the globe. So many thanks to you for that. Gates Institute and ICFP have placed equity at the center of our work. And based on the feedback from the community, the ICFP community across the board, the theme chosen for the 2025 ICFP is Equity Through Action, Advancing Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights for All. So we're calling on innovative solutions and concrete commitments to address health and systemic inequities worldwide. So this theme is the focus for our first track for the conference, to which scientists and researchers and program implementers and advocates can submit an individual abstract or a pre-formed panel that's focused on the research, program best practices, and advocacy efforts that are focused on equity in our work across the board. So I'm happy to let everybody know that we have a couple of more weeks, about a week and a half before the deadline to submit your abstracts that are focused on equity or any of the other topics that we cover in our 14 tracks, but really wanting to make sure that if you have a good story to tell with regard to equity in your work, please do submit your abstract so that you can share it with the rest of the world, the rest of our community. ICFP is really working hard to make sure that we are doing everything we can to center equity. So we're translating everything that we're communicating across our websites and emails, meeting notes and agendas, newsletters, and of course, our meetings and webinars in several different languages, English, French, and Spanish this year, because this is the first year we're hosting ICFP in Latin America. So very excited about that. We're also looking to potentially add Portuguese to the mix because Brazil is a big country down in Latin America, and we know that there are many people that are interested in participating in ICFP. So we're working on getting funding together for that. So thank you so much, this group of presenters and authors who are here today to share their work. Their very important work in equitable language practices so that we can all make sure that we're doing what we can on ICFP's side and that the larger community understands the best practices to make sure that we're all doing our part. So back to you, Shani. Thanks so much and looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you both for those wonderful remarks and for all of the support that you both have shown in your respective groups in helping to put on this event. I'm noting that we're having a bit of a challenge for folks to be able to self-identify and update their language preference for the breakout rooms via their name. No worries. We've got organizers noting in the chat which ones you signed up for, and we'll help move you to the appropriate breakout rooms when it's time. Great. Alors, je continue en français. J'ai encore deux.
I'm switching over to French, so I have 2 more slides to introduce, and then I'll transition to our panel. So before we start, I would like to highlight a few key terms that we'll present today. So first, language hegemony. In our sector, we talk about it in terms of domination of one language, which is English in our case, over other languages. When we talk about language inclusion, we prefer this term to equity, language equity, because in terms of languages, talking about equity is probably not realistic, and equity may give the impression that talking other languages than English may be a disability, and we see this as a benefit rather than not. So regarding translation and interpretation, translation refers to converting a text from one language to another, whereas interpretation refers to converting speech from one language to another. And lastly, regarding our point of view, our position, we're conscious first that French and Spanish are not the only languages that are impacted by English hegemony, and those 2 languages and Portuguese as well are colonial languages with histories of marginalizing indigenous languages. But we do think, we're convinced that the debate around language inclusivity must start with functional access. And we think that this is the first step to invite more people around the table to have this conversation. We also acknowledge that we don't have all responses, all answers, and we invite you to share your ideas in your chat and to let us know what you do to improve language inclusivity in your work. Don't forget that you're invited to write in the chat in any 3 languages. We'll make sure that it's translated. So please feel free to write in any of the languages you want. So right now, you know, we are going through a very hard and challenging time in our sector, but we still think that language inclusivity is important, and we're not here to shame anyone. We But we know that when we are in a crisis context where we're facing a challenge, we tend to turn to our usual working modes, which oftentimes leave some people behind. So for us, this webinar is all the more important today than a few months ago. And we really hope that participants would at least understand a little better and have a few tangible actions that they can implement to promote inclusion. I will hand it off to Elizabeth, who will moderate our panel. Thank you, Shani. And hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Arlette Parrish. I am technical director in gender at JPIGO, and I'm very happy to be here today as the moderator for this panel. We have 4 global experts in sexual and reproductive health today who have gracefully accepted to share their stories on the impact of English hegemony on their work. And they will also suggest solutions for others to start implementing now. This panel will be presented in the preferred language of our 4 speakers. Our first 2 panelists will speak in French, so I'll introduce them in French. Our third panelist will speak in English, and I'll introduce her in English. And our fourth panelist will speak in Spanish. I will introduce her in English because I don't really speak Spanish, but you'll have translation. So make sure that you're in the audio channel of your preferred language if you do not speak all 3 languages. Our first panelist today is Marie Ba. She's the director of the Ouagadougou Partnership Coordination Unit. She's a leading advocate for women and girls' rights in the region. She leads collaboration, coordination between health ministries of the 9 member countries of the Ouagadougou Partnership. She also coordinates civil society organizations and other implementing partners, as well as international donors supporting reproductive health. Marie, the floor is yours. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see a lot of participants for this conversation. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Marie Ba. I grew up in Senegal. I'm from Senegal. I studied in the US. The reason why I chose to go to the US rather than France, which is the country where traditionally Senegalese students tend to go to, my mother at the time already sensed that, with globalization happening, that English would be the dominant language. So that's why my brother and I were sent off to the US for our studies. And that's important for the rest of my intervention, my talking points today. And as for my careers, I spent a lot of times in Washington, D.C. for Publishing Service International. And then I went to their Mali office. And then I went back to Senegal because it was very important for my parents at the time to be able to go back to Senegal, to be back home, to help develop our country and the region. I'll give you an example on how the hegemony of the English language impacted me. First, I need to acknowledge that I was very privileged because I had this bilingual education, and because I'm perfectly bilingual, I'm also expected a lot when I participate in meetings, in conferences. I'm expected to be moderator or a panelist because I can speak both languages. But there is also a burden, and which was mentioned in the article that we'll mention later, that there are there are a lot of expectations that I should translate a lot of things. And this is sometimes very challenging because I end up in meetings that I should not really be in, but I'm here to translate. And this takes me a lot of time. I would say that it is a burden, a disadvantage in a way, even though of course, it's helped me a lot in my career. But one concrete example that I'd like to share is that one day at an international conference that I will not name, I've been asked to moderate a panel where we had a mix of Francophone and Anglophone speakers. And we were supposed to have live interpretation. But when we were about to start, we were told everything was working. But one of the participants at some point flags that the audio channel was not working. And so this person was not able to understand what speakers were saying. And in a quite authoritarian way, asked me to translate, asked me personally to translate what the panelists were saying. So I had a triple work in a way. I had to moderate, to ask questions, but also make sure to be focused enough to be able to translate everything. So just to tell you that I finished this panel with a huge headache, having to do all this work. And I think, you know, it would have been very unfair if this had happened to someone else who could not necessarily speak all languages that well. It would have been very unfair to ask the same thing. So what I want to conclude is that there is a very negative perception of non-Anglophone speakers based on your intonation, your accent, your intention in your voice. There's this perception that what this person, this speaker is saying is not smart enough. This person is judged based on the vocabulary. Their relevance is based on their vocabulary. And so this bias, I think, is still very much a reality, and we need to acknowledge it. And I want to say that, of course, it's not your intonation, your accent that that determines how smart you have to say, what you have to say is. So in the article that we'll share with you later, and that triggered this webinar, we also highlighted this idea that we need to encourage not only learning other languages, you know, as for instance, in our case, at the Ouagadougou Partnership, we established a series of classes that lasted several months to facilitate learning English among our staff, just to be more comfortable in meetings, but in conferences as well. But I think it's also very important to force as much as possible to host conferences in non-Anglophone countries. So I'm very happy that ICFP will take place in Colombia this year. It will force people to just adapt, not only to adapt to the local culture, but also a different language. And I think you know, forcing this, I think it will be awkward in the beginning, but in the long term, I think having quotas to make sure that the number of Spanish speaker, German speaker, Arabic speaker, I think, of course, we'll need to do this step by step, but force that reality, force that collaboration to make sure that participation in conferences is more equal. I think this is very important. Of course, not everything will happen, you know, in the first conference or the second, but to cultivate that language collaboration, I think, is very, very key. And making sure that conferences do not necessarily happen in Anglophone countries, I think, is very important. This is one idea, but I'm sure that my co-panelists have other very relevant ideas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story and for these suggestions. Our next speaker is Mohamed Lee, who is Regional Director for West and Central Africa and Gender Health. He has more than 15 years of experience in program management, monitoring and evaluation and research. He's worked with multicultural teams focusing on public health, community engagement, and grassroots empowerment. In his current role, he supervises all of Engender's health programs in West and Central Africa to improve the lives of women and girls in the region. Mohamed, the floor is yours. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Marie, for setting the stage. Thank you, all of the panelists here and all the participants who are joining us today. I would like to share my personal experience. Marie talked about her own personal stories, and I would like to share my personal story about my career to focus on an aspect that's sometimes overseen but has to do with mental health and personal challenges that one can experience. And regarding our technical performance, so my personal experience, what I experienced when I was hired over 10 years ago as monitoring and evaluation officer at a US-based nonprofit that I also won't name, I had very limited skills in English at the time, but I had expertise in data collection and on technical issues in monitoring and evaluation, data analysis, and this expertise was recognized in Côte d'Ivoire, where I'm from. I had worked successfully there with the National Institute of Statistics, the Ministry of Planning, the National Office of Population before joining the NGO. And I was hired in a completely Francophone process, but I had to work with a team in DC, two teams actually, one that was working on technical aspects, and they were all English speakers. We had weekly meetings with these colleagues at their headquarters who would speak very fast. I just couldn't get what they were saying, frankly. They had very strong accent, and so and anyway, I don't think they really cared about what I would feel because I was the only one in the situation. Or they would simply treat me as an incompetent. And this what was really hard for me to deal with, because the fact that I could not speak English was systematically perceived as incompetence. And it was very hard to experience because I knew that I was not incompetent. So before each meeting, I felt anxious. I could not sleep. I felt arrogance. I felt depreciated. Even though I could not understand everything, one day someone said, and I definitely understood that, someone said, "What's he doing in this office?" So that I understood, and this was really hard to take. And we had other meetings that were more program oriented, and on that meeting we had a meeting who could speak French and with whom I had very good work relationship. She liked me. She would affectionately call me professor. She liked the way I would introduce things, the way I would frame things. And when she was there on the meetings, I was less anxious. I would feel more respected. And everyone, would more and more would gradually understand that I could work very well. And that I was not incompetent. And yes, people understood that I was not incompetent, and I gradually earned their respect. And the only difference is that I was able to speak not only the language that I was trained in, but also the language in which the program was being implemented. So thanks to the intervention of these colleagues, I earned other people's respect, and I could also grow and be promoted in this organization. But I had to improve my English, because if I did not do this, there would have been a natural barrier. So thanks to her being here, I would feel better. I was able to achieve results. And sometimes I wonder, if she hadn't been there, this label of the incompetent, how long would it have had lasted? Maybe I would still be seen this way. And I want to say this colleague is Elizabeth Arlody Parrish. So thank you. I really had to say this. So my recommendation is really to first change our perspective, to not associate incompetence and language barriers. I first focus on competence, and this is something that I always try to improve. and language is second. I think another key consideration is that, you know, language inclusion shouldn't be an option, because in our project, there aren't any possible negotiation on technicality, but so we shouldn't negotiate on processes the same way we shouldn't negotiate on language and language inclusion. So it's really important that someone should not be only allowed to express themselves based on the few vocabulary that they have. This is by really allowing them to talk in depth about what they know about, that we can foster innovation. And not thinking of language inclusion really hinders and even kills innovation. And I want to finish by saying that when we work with communities, we insist in the fact that those people work in the local language. So we really know that if we don't speak the local language, the project can't work. So why do we want to apply this in the village without applying this at a more global level? So if we want our community to be inclusive, we also need to be inclusive ourselves and reduce those inequalities that marginalize some of the members of the ecosystems. So I'll stop here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. And thank you for the co-hosts to position this question in the debate. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you for your personal story. I am truly honored to have played a role in it. Thank you. I will now switch to English for our two remaining speakers.
Our next speaker is Aminata Diop, a former independent translator and interpreter. As an entrepreneur leading an environmental consulting firm that intervenes in various African regions, Aminata understands very well the importance of clear communication. With over a decade of experience in translation and interpretation for international and local clients, she has firsthand knowledge of language barriers and strategies to overcome them. Over to you, Aminata.
All right. So hello, my name is Aminata, and I want to thank all of the panelists who are here, Marie, Mohammed, and Angela. Thank you for partaking in this, and thank you all for inviting me. I don't think I have such a great or intense career as Marie or Mohammed, but I'll talk a little bit about what I do and what I've done. I've worked as an interpreter and translator for maybe about 10 years, coming back from the US. It was at the beginning just something to make ends meet while I was studying for my master's. But then I actually really got the hang of it and really enjoyed it. And it was extremely well paid in Dakar, I must say. So I just got into that. I worked for Tostan, which is very well known in Senegal. And it's an NGO that works with human rights. I've also worked for Africa Resource Center, which is more of a recent NGO that was launched and funded, I think, by the Gates Foundation as well, and that works in access to healthcare and health products down to the last mile, and works with a lot of ministries around Africa. So I kind of have an idea of sort of the health and reproductive world, but it's not my day-to-day experience. What I do is I manage an environmental consulting firm. So we make sure that multinationals that come to Senegal and they want to build, for example, a power plant or any development project, that they abide to strict environmental standards, whether it's national regulation or international IFC performance standards. The reason I say this is because when a culture comes into another culture, they must abide or understand the realities of another culture or their host culture. And I think it helped me a lot as a former translator and interpreter in even getting a lot of these business opportunities because I was aware of the little nuances and how to express something that was fundamentally, for example, Wolof or SRHR to somebody who was just an American person or a French person because of my experience as an interpreter. And so it's important for me to talk about hiring the right interpreters when you have a conference. I think that when any sector, whether it's the health sector or whether it's education or whether it's finance, they usually have a long-running theme per year, for example, and they have many conferences that they have throughout the world. But they think that all interpreters are the same. So when you hire an interpreter, you're going to have an excellent interpreter. It doesn't matter who it is. If they're excellent, the quality and the speed of their interpretation will be great. They will be aware, for example, of the jargon used by your company or your organization. So in the case of SSR, if you're going to have, for example, a conference here in Senegal, at the very last minute, you're going to hire some interpreters. You're not going to give them your glossary, and you're going to expect them for a whole week to understand what it took you years, sometimes decades, to learn, going to university and having all of these conferences, and you expect a quality like that. Sometimes you even expect them to understand more than the languages that you hired them for. I've had 2 instances that were very particularly daunting and difficult for me. Well, at least one. I think about a year ago, surprisingly, I was called to the new president, Diomaye Faye's, and like some sort of huge conference where we had to do interpretation very last minute. We went there and we were really ready to give it our all because, you know, we're all patriots and really like the new president. So it was really last minute and I couldn't say no, even though I had stopped interpreting for quite a while. Now, when we went there, Diomaye didn't end up coming, but some ministers came over and some of them spoke Wolof and only Wolof, which is one of the main languages in Senegal. It is extremely difficult if you haven't had the training to translate from Wolof to French. And then there were English-speaking people there, so you didn't really know, were you going to translate in French or whether you were going to translate in English. So when there were only 2 interpreters translating for the entire Abdou Diouf Conference Center, so like 500, 1,000 people there, we had to switch it up. We had almost 0 experience translating from Wolof to French or from Wolof to English, but we had to do it for maybe 3-4 hours, and it was horrible because we didn't really know that we were doing a good job, and also because we just didn't know. We were doing a horrible job. We didn't know how to translate from Wolof to French because there are nuances. There are sayings in Wolof that you can't really translate unless you have a strong experience in you know, in French or in English. How are you going to translate the Constitution? How are you going to talk about, like, for example, a Wolof proverb and translate it right then and there in English in a way that somebody who's an Englishman or somebody who's from New York City can understand it? So these things for me are important to stress out because I believe that it stems from a, not lack of goodwill, but just like lack of preparation and just estimating that interpreters are just walking dictionaries and just know everything about anything because they are paid for it. And then sometimes you'll have people in the higher ups that are doing the hiring and agreeing to hire who think that paying an interpreter $700 a day is excessive. And so they'll only agree to maybe $300, $400, and that will get you the quality of the fee that you give out. And so in my opinion, it is very important to do 3 things. Hope I remember them. But first of all, to have the budget for excellent translation and to understand that and to communicate this to the people who make those budgetary decisions. A great interpreter is at least $700 a day. You need at least 2 per conference, and usually if it's a big conference, it's going to be a team of 4. One way to also remedy this, and it comes as a second solution, is to hire long-term interpreters. So if you're a big organization, you can hire 2 interpreters full-time who will understand your jargon and who will travel with you because you have the budget, and you will be able to sort of maybe negotiate a fee that is feasible for both parties, and you hire them long-term. And then to give the glossaries in time or the right vocabulary way before an interpretation opportunity arises or an important conference. Because if you don't, you can have a set of interpreters, one that maybe understands your jargon because they've done it in the past, and another that just comes in, says yes, signs at the last minute, and then understands the gist of it, but not all of it. And then some people might be lost in translation. And then last but not least, really think about interpreters that, if you have the means, master the languages that you're hiring them for, but considers also the languages that are spoken at the host country where you're having the conferences. So if you're going to have an interpreter that you're going to hire for a conference where someone like Jomai is going to speak in, and Jomai is known for speaking in Wolof a lot of times, which is fair. Hire someone that speaks in English and French, but also definitely Wolof. So that's just an example. Yeah, I think those are my 2 cents. That's what I have for my experience as an interpreter. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Aminata. We really appreciate this unique perspective. As implementers, we often don't hear about the challenges being faced by the interpreters working in this space. So now we are moving on to our final speaker, who is Angela Leon Caceres, Global Coordinator for Women for Global Fund. Angela is a multilingual feminist professional and mixed methods researcher with a specialization in global public health and development, and with strong expertise in gender transformative programming within SRHR, HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. She has a decade of experience working in multidisciplinary and highly complex contexts in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, especially for women, adolescents, and girls in all of our diversity. Angela, the floor is yours.
Buenos días. Bueno, voy a comenzar a
Good morning, everyone. I will start speaking in Spanish then. It is a privilege to share this space with my co-panelists today. Particularly being able to speak in Spanish and working from the point of view on linguistic inclusion for all of our populations in all of our diversities. So thank you very much for creating this space. And I would like to start saying that language is never neutral. That's a very important thing to understand. And it has always been a mechanism where power operates. And we know that from the academic point of view, language is not only a reflection of hegemony, but it also builds and materializes systems of power. And I believe that it is a very important thing to understand from sexual and reproductive rights, particularly in terms of gender equity and structural inequities. It is very important to understand how language imposes certain visions of the world and also provides value on certain knowledge. And this is not only about talking about, let's say, specific languages like English, Spanish, or French, but also the ways of knowledge, in the ways how populations that have been excluded historically cannot be included in conversations that are being used to make decisions about them, about their health, and about their sexual rights. In global health, when we talk about sexual and reproductive rights, we understand that English is the default language to access certain spaces, to make decisions, and to have legitimacy when we are communicating. And this linguistic domination determines the validity of this knowledge, but it also creates a barrier. It also creates a very big barrier around who really receives the funding to lead and implement projects that actually represent the not only linguistic realities, but also socially and culturally and historically of populations in our diversity. Therefore, I think that we should not only be asking what are the inequalities, but how many? How many inequalities and how do they exclude, again, perhaps professionals, activists, and advocates whose mother tongue is not necessarily English. This, of course, implies as well understanding what are the barriers for organizations in the Global South. And this is a big opportunity that we see in this conference, hosting this conference for the first time in a Latin American country, where we not only expect for spaces to be linguistically inclusive, but also this can provide an additional platform to understand what is the participation of women in our diversity. And we can also talk about changes that move towards equality and the distribution of power. Likewise, from my personal experience, I've had the experience of navigating the various international conferences that are in English or French, but if you have received this information in other languages, sometimes it's quite complex to think in a different language than your own. And this, of course, limits the type of conversation and communication that can be had in the creation of networks, in the creation of opportunities, and in the way that we can build opportunities that are necessary for organizations that are particularly located in the Global South. I also believe that it is very important what Aminata was saying around translation and interpretation, because sometimes we think that for this type of linguistic diversity, it's only limited to a direct translation. However, even though it is very important to have interpreters and translators, when we talk about decolonization, we need to do a different clarity around what is a redistribution of power and decision-making from a perspective of the Global South. And this can be translated to the scientific evidence production, because we know that English, being a lingua franca in science and academia, we understand that the great amount of research processes and richer papers are being produced in English, mainly. There's a study in Lancet Global Health from 2021 that found that 80% of research that is created around global health is produced in English, understanding as well that the core of the health problems occur in non-English speaking countries, particularly around Global South. That provides an idea, right, of how far we are around having inclusive systems or a redistribution of power, and this so sought idea of inclusivity and equity in the relationships between countries and people that occupy these spaces in the world. I also believe it's important to speak from the participation of non-multilingual communities, because sometimes these are the last communities to be spoken for, and in many cases they are contacted via middlemen and translations that do not allow a significant participation of these communities. And when we talk about the specific Latin American and Caribbean experience, when we see that there are feminist movements in their diversity that advocate for sexual and reproductive rights, unfortunately, they are underrepresented in international spaces due to this linguistic limitation that they have, which includes for them or involve greater costs for them so that they can participate in these spaces. And also, the opportunity of learning other languages and to handle ourselves in those languages is also part of the social determinants that play a very important part, because this requires access to education that is also a limitation for people to exposing themselves to other languages and other cultures. To wrap up my comments, I think that a few practical solutions for real linguistic inclusion, besides having translation and interpretation that definitely are super important for inclusive processes, it is important to have project design and project and conference design and organizations where documents and processes and abstracts can be accepted in various languages, and using as well other type of resources that are perhaps visual, that are included in multiple languages for trainings and sessions. Of course, this needs to be included as part of the budget of those conferences. So there should be a specific piece of the budget in order to address linguistic variety so that we can actually distribute the power. And this really plays into the concept of decolonization of language. And we are not only talking about the actual translation, but actually funding regional and local grassroots spaces where we can fight for linguistic justice. We cannot talk about decolonization in global health if we cannot confront the hegemony that languages also play, and if we do not have much more participative and multilingual spaces so that we can value the epistemic diversities that come from all of the communities that represent the Global South. So this, I would like to just thank again this space that we have today, to not only that we have the fact that we have this conference in 3 languages, but we are also addressing the very important issue of global diversity.
Thank you very much for your unique perspective, Angela. So I want to just give one last thanks to our panelists, and also to note that because we did want to ensure that each panelist had a chance to tell their story, we have gone a bit over, and so we will go a bit past the hour with our presentations before joining the breakout groups. So we hope you can stay with us for the remainder of our presentations. I will now switch back to French. Donc maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Mariam Fall, qui va nous orienter sur des stratégies pratiques.
So now I will hand it off to Mariam Fall. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you to our panelists who took the time to share their stories, their perspective with us. I think we all heard their challenges, their personal challenges, and we will share now a few tricks, a few ideas that we think are useful to improve language inclusion in practice. So the first thing I want to talk about is to focus on emails and electronic communication. The first thing we suggest is to translate your emails, both the headline or the subject, but also the text of your email. There are tools, sophisticated tools like DeepL. It's quite sophisticated, and the translation is actually more accurate than what it used to be. And that would allow the person that you're emailing something to not have to translate what you're saying. We also suggest to activate spelling and grammar checks in the target language. So if you translated an email from French to English, you can activate the spelling check so that your email is more clear, and will allow the person who is receiving your email to have a very clear email and without any spelling mistakes. So in the same area of electronic communication, we suggest to include the source text. So if I take the example of ICFP, and this is something they're already doing very well, when the initial communication is in English, they leave the English, but they add the translation of the whole email with every information at the bottom. So that allows people who, no matter what language they speak, they can always refer to the source text. And that also allows us to be a bilingual exchange, communication, and it allows to kind of go beyond that language barrier. When sending a group mail, so an email that you send to several participants, we suggest not to send one email to all Francophone speakers, another one in Arabic, another one, just like we said previously, we suggest to just have one email with all languages in the same email and to send it to everyone. This will include everyone, and it's a multilingual email, and so everybody feels included. Nobody thinks that their language is not considered or was added as an afterthought. So these are the three idea suggestions that we would share regarding communications, emails, and electronic communications. In the area of research and knowledge production, so everyone, who is involved in research, investigation, and personally, I experienced that. We know that a lot of research is conducted in Francophone area, but the research is conducted and published in English. So what we suggest for researchers as well as for publishers is to at least publish the results of this research in the language of the country where the study took place. For instance, if I take the example of Côte d'Ivoire, even if it's US funding, for instance, the results should be published at least at the very minimum in French, so that the people in this country who most need this data is able to use the data. This will allow local researchers to access essential information, because if they do not speak English and the results are published in English, maybe they hear about the study, but they won't be able to use it the way they want to. Still in research and knowledge production, when talking about research that's already been published, no matter the context, one thing that can be done is to contact the main author. When an article is published, you'll see the list of authors with their contact information, so you can contact this person, the primary author, and ask for their authorization to translate their work, the article. You can use a tool like DeepL to translate a document. And then you can share this with your colleagues. So this is a way to allow non-Anglophone speakers to access scientific evidence. Regarding event planning, so among our panelists, I think a few of our colleagues offered a few advices, but I'll focus now on several points. So first, presentations or the abstracts. When there is presentations in an event, it would be great that the presentation reflects the composition of participants. So if if I, for instance, the ICFP will take place in Bogota, who is where we speak Spanish. So Spanish should be the dominant language there. And so someone should be able to present in English, but interpretation should be ensured in Spanish so that there is full participation. In the same way, it's important to establish norms for multilingual space. We've seen that if you've read our article, our commentary, it's important to set norms and to say that there is access to interpretation. It's important really to remind people to do that. It's also important to help interpreters do their job in this way. And that also allows to invite everyone, Anglophone and non-Anglophone speakers, to participate fully in the event, reminding frequently the language inclusion norms. Then it's also very important to look for more interpreters. We think that human simultaneous interpretation is the gold standard. AI does a great job, but it's really not the same as having human interpretation. So I think this is really important to have an interpretation plan, whether it's Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic. If you're going to have multilingual participants, it's important to use human interpretation, human interpreters. If it's really not possible, then at least at the very minimum, have AI. There are tools like Wordly, for instance, that you can use in this kind of events so that people, can at a minimum know what's going on. And if there is no possibility to have interpretation, whether it's a human or AI, it's important to let participants know in advance so that they know that they need to do whatever they need to do to participate as they want in the event. The ninth suggestions is that when you prepare an event, it's important to translate all materials in all even supported languages. I'll take the example of ICFP again. We've seen that for all communications, we always say at the very minimum, at least the translation in French and English and Spanish. So when you organize an event, it's important to embed the translation from the very beginning. So translate, of course, all materials in the official language of the country, the host country, but other languages that will be spoken by other participants. It's important to have visuals in each languages so that they have quick access to the key information they need to know. And lastly, number 10, our last suggestions as part of event planning is to share material with interpreters in advance. This is something that Ami stressed out, and this is something that needs to be done in advance because today, as experts in sexual and reproductive health, for instance, we are experts in this, but not all interpreters are. So it's important for them to understand concepts, to understand where the field is. It's important that they have the time to investigate what they need to investigate. So having a good communication with interpreters is fundamental for the event to go well. So all the materials that has been developed for this event should be shared in advance with interpreters to let them prepare and also to improve the quality of interpretation overall. These are the few solutions or suggestions that we would like to share regarding event planning, research and knowledge production, and email and electronic communication. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mariam. Thank you to our dear panelists. I think we've learned a lot. I would like to remind you or to inform you that this webinar was based on a commentary that was recently published in the Global Health Science and Practice, which was written by a lot of the panelists and organizers of this webinar today. This article, this commentary, rather is available in French and English, and it dives in more details into what approaches people can use to start fostering language inclusion. So I'll share these articles in both languages in the chat, so you may access it, so you can read it and have access to it. I think it's very worth it for you to know what it's about, to share it. We've learned a lot today, and that's only a start. I actually have one question for you. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so this one is good. So my question for you, since this is only the start of a learning experience with among all of us, I would like to ask you, please choose. Okay, so what would you? So first of all, it's not this slide, but I would like to ask you only. Okay, please ask one response only, and I ask you to write the letter of your response in the chat. What is your priority in terms of support? Would it be language inclusion for indigenous language in Latin America? B, Francophone inclusion in research settings? C, preparing a multilingual conference? Or D, other? And in this case, if your answer is D, please specify. So please take a minute to add your priority, to add the letter corresponding to your priority. What's your most urgent need? And secondly, I would like for you to ask us questions. We'll add a Q&R in the small groups. If we could move to the slide on the question regarding questions before that. Okay, this one. So what urgent question, what other challenge do you have and that you would like to share? I'd like to ask you to take 2 seconds to write in the chat what's the main focus, what's your main challenge in terms of language inclusion. Then we'll transition to our breakout rooms to work on hands-on tools, practical tools that have a lot to do with this inclusion, language inclusion work. And so we'll address your questions first, and we'll talk about the tools. And so I invite you to join these breakout rooms. Thank you for participating so far, and I really encourage you, I invite you to move to the breakout rooms to work on the tools. So I think we can go ahead and open the breakout rooms. There you go. You should receive an invite, and please click join to join your breakout room. If you stay with us, please let us know in the chat what language you would like to join. I mean, what language you would like to work in. Is it English, French, or Spanish? And we'll be able to redirect you to the correct breakout room.